In the summer of my 4th grade in elementary school, my mom and I moved to the United States after a rocky divorce process. Oddly enough, the divorce wasn't anything too hard to accept. My parents acted civil enough in front of me, and they seemed to have been in good terms after it had all gone down. It had, however, been my first reality check, meaning that up until then, I had never really thought about the possibility of things sucking, of things not working out, or of there not being any real reason behind the misfortune that befalls us sometimes. Being a sheltered kid, I found it easier back then to look at everything through an idealistic lens, to say things happened for a reason, and that ultimately, if everyone tried their best, their efforts would surely be rewarded. Then, in 6th grade, the relationship my mom was in at the time turned psychologically abusive, gaslighting to be exact. It's a fucking horrible thing to witness firsthand, especially when you're a child. Needless to say, I was also affected by this toxic relationship. I'd already been an introverted kid before this, but witnessing something that cruel and violent was infuriating and frustrating, and the helplessness I felt, the knowledge that there was little to nothing I could do about it, meant my self-esteem and confidence fell rapidly, splattering on the concrete, left there for me to pick up later on and try to piece back together as best as I could. This person who had taken such good care of us up until then had now turned into someone who seemed to want nothing more than to cause us as much pain as possible, and I could do nothing about it. Being a kid, a preteen I suppose, I felt incredibly powerless. I clung to things like religion for a short while, but even that provided me with no comfort, with no answers and no relief. Eventually, we managed to escape that horrible situation, but by then, well, I was pretty fucked. I mean, I've been in that situation from 6th to 9th grade. Literally some of the most formative years of my preteens had been filled with instability and emotional distress. I'd completely closed myself off. Someone who had strongly believed in ideals in a logical world, thoroughly shat on by misfortune and emotional pain that didn't seem justified, that didn't seem to exist with any purpose behind it other than to hurt me and those I cared about. To top it off, I had to deal with bullying as well. The situation at home made me even more awkward at school, which means I was often the target of people's ridicule, in classic middle school fashion. Eventually, I learned how to function without having to ever make emotional connections. My feelings locked up somewhere deep in me. I started playing the role that would fit the group I wanted to hang out with the best. I wore another person's skin, someone that I felt wasn't me, but having never had the chance to even find out what kind of person I wanted to be, it was fairly easy to play these roles. Obviously, I felt immensely guilty about this. Here were people who I found were legitimately fun to hang out with, who seemed to be good people, and I felt absolutely nothing for them. It was like I was putting all of my relationships in small glass boxes and observing them from outside, sometimes moving some things here and there with little tweezers, but never making major changes, never attempting to grow these relationships, to form legitimate emotional connections. The issue reached its peak in my sophomore year of high school, when I fell into a very deep depression. Not truly void of emotion, I would do nothing but lay in my bed all day and think of all the other options that could have been presented to me, of possibilities that perhaps could have led me somewhere that wasn't where I was, of a version of me that was perfectly healthy and able to function within society, with honesty and legitimate empathy. There were times when I wondered if I was somehow bordering on sociopathy, so emotionally disconnected, even the deaths of relatives, finding out my dad had been robbed of everything he had, or even the news that my grandma had pretty bad cancer, didn't seem to shake me up all that much. I turned to anime as a way to escape the horribly shitty mental state I was in, sometimes finishing up to 10 shows a week. Unable to get a proper hold of my emotions, I found comfort in knowing that I could easily understand the message and implications behind the media I watched, even if I was unable to find anything of the sort in my own life. Eventually, after months and months of self-reflecting and a lot of mental gymnastics, I managed to somewhat brute force my way out of that mental state. Obviously, it didn't come without its consequences. I was still as apathetic as ever, and over time I've become more jaded and cynical than before. I've managed to become a bit more emotional, sure, but this meant that all the pent-up resentment was flooding back out and taking the shape of spiteful apathy, which is a weird phrase and I'm not sure if it even makes sense, but whatever. When people told me their issues or concerns, I couldn't help but be annoyed. I'd suffered through worse things and no one showed any concern for me, so why should I care? I would often tell myself these people should just shut up and deal with it. After all, in my eyes, I was living proof that functioning like a proper human was fairly easy as long as you chose to seek nothing out of life. That was the type of person I'd become. I was in this state for maybe a year, and then I found March Comes In Like a Lion. Talking about your favorite thing of all time, well, it's pretty hard. There's just no way you can accurately and articulately relay your emotion for something you feel that strongly about. And even if you did, if other people don't react as strongly as you, well, it's bound to be disappointing. This has always been the case for me when trying to talk about March Comes In Like a Lion. So many things I love about it, yet almost no way for me to encapsulate it all at once. Sometimes I think I have the right words, I feel them form in an instance and I think I almost have it, but then I read it back to myself and never mind, they actually don't feel as right as they did the first time. This anime is so emotionally resonant with me that my perspective on it is fluid, if that makes sense. When I think of it, words come to mind, sure, but the only times I feel like I'm accurately conveying how important it is to me is when I'm thinking about the particular emotions different instances squeezed out of me. Thus, while I had to set it all up by talking about all my emotional issues first, I hope you'll excuse my self-indulgence. So I started watching March Comes In Like a Lion, and the first episode immediately, though subtly, enraptured me. You have this crazy animation starting off the episode, lots of black and white intermixing like a whirlwind and forming a set of eyes, then Rei's silhouette contrasted with a bright blue sky, the sound of intense wind blasting in the background through all of this, Rei's sister opening the series up with a cold-hearted observation, closing it off with a cruel Then after that, we have Rei silently going through the motions for 10 whole minutes. The first words that come out of his voice are "Usoda." Pretty poignant. The mood that's been set up by the series so far seems to be thoroughly drenched in tragedy and depression, but as Rei exits the shogi hall, he's hit with a message from Hina, the middle Kawamoto sister, inviting him to dinner. As Rei's about to refuse, he gets a message from Akari, the oldest Kawamoto sister, asking him to drop by the convenience store to fetch some things they need, easily roping him into dinner with. The series succinctly establishes the relationship these girls have with Rei before we even meet them. Their first appearance is set to a warm background, their house filled with lots of soft browns and a bunch of cute sound effects coming in left and right, along with Momo's cheerful voice easily overpowers and drowns out the dreary tone the episode had at the start, immediately giving us a feeling for the pacing. Some dialogue lines, some monologues, some visual cues, and by the end of the first episode we know exactly what kind of person Rei is and what these girls mean to him. The first episode is an almost perfect introduction for the series, but it wasn't until the middle of the first season that I found myself truly enwrapped and invested in Rei's story. This pivotal turning point consists of Rei breaking down in frustration after a bunch of different anxieties and feelings of guilt keep piling up on him. He feels guilty. He, who feels no ambition, against them, who seem to constantly be putting it all on the line for the thing they love. Upon beating his opponents, he feels like he snatched something from them. Even if he manages to feel a bit better about one situation, another one comes along to pay him back double. After a particularly devastating match, Rei breaks down in frustration. What exactly is he supposed to do? He yells at the clouds because there's no one to yell at. There's no rational way for him to release these pent-up emotions. It's a beautiful scene, and was the catalyst to me realizing I couldn't keep living this way. Because when I saw that scene, I felt catharsis, immense satisfaction. It was a tragic scene, yet I couldn't help being happy for Rei. I realized this was the first step. Then I thought back to how happy I felt watching Rei interact with the Kawamoto sisters, and I realized that that's exactly what I had wanted my whole life. Emotional release, a cherished emotional connection, healthy relationships in which we work through things together. Then, Rei talks to Takahashi, a middle school student seeking to be a professional baseball player. He looks up to Rei because he became a pro at an early age, and when asked why it is he's made the decisions he's made, Rei tries to answer honestly. And it gets through. Here is a person who has chosen to walk down a similar path to Rei's, and this person understands. This person manages to articulate in words an issue Rei couldn't put his finger on. Here, a middle school student who he didn't know till then manages to put into words what Rei never could, and all as a result of deciding to be honest about his response, even if ultimately the answer didn't seem satisfying enough. That he cared enough to make the attempt was enough to get through to someone. All of these things on top of each other began to connect the dots in my head. The puzzle pieces I had willingly scattered once again formed into something that had existed in my brain long ago. If you make the attempt, you will be rewarded. This thought, which I had willingly tossed aside long ago because it seemed way too idealistic, sucked to me for the first time in years, and I felt the world make just a bit more sense. Sure, I would experience pain, discomfort, sadness, frustration, a flurry of negative emotions. That was fine. To me, making the attempt had always been satisfying enough. The more Rei's emotional issues and tragic backstory were unraveled, the more I found myself wholeheartedly invested in the series. I mean, here is this kid whose family died abruptly, the people he loved snatched away from him for no reason, those around him indifferent to it and not willing to make the commitment, offered a chance to survive through his dad's friend, vowing to fully devote himself to shogi, from his perspective binding himself to the game for life, using it as an escape but also seeing it as the chains he tied himself down with. We can immediately see the three-dimensionality of the issues Rei is facing. Seemingly one-sided at first, as the series enwrapped me further on the character's changing perspective, a holistic view of the situation formed. Oh, how cruel it was for his adoptive dad to bind Rei to shogi like that, absolutely destroying the relationship between him and his adoptive siblings in the process. Except, wait a minute. His adoptive dad only does it because he feels a connection to Rei through shogi. Not being related by blood, he feels like the board binds them together and brings them closer to that ideal father-son relationship. Not to mention, it's also the one thing binding both of them to Rei's biological father, who was also his adoptive father's best friend. Oh, how spiteful and vengeful is Kyoko, his adoptive sister, telling him all these things to bring him down, constantly insulting him and poking at his emotional scars, trying to guilt him, trying to make him fail. Oh, wait a minute, this came as a result of various elements. Rei's inability to properly connect with her or know why she was hurting, as well as the feeling of neglect she felt from her dad combined with her abrasive personality. She's literally just a girl with daddy issues. Goto, this dude, what an asshole, mocking Rei, using brute force to get his way, shameless and unapologetic, and in the wrong for keeping Kyoko around him when he has a wife. Oh, his wife is in the hospital in a coma and she could die any day? Of course he would have a short fuse, especially with a kid that isn't even close to half his age preaching to him about rights and wrongs. Of course he wouldn't mind keeping Kyoko around. With the one person he truly loves in a coma, it only makes sense he would give in to the comfort and warmth of being with someone that cares for you. That asshole of a teacher that let all that bullying happen. Oh, it happens every year and she could never de-escalate the situation no matter how hard she tried, huh? Well, what about the girl that was doing the bullying? Surely her anxieties caused her to become apathetic and cause pain to others in order to release that pent-up insecurity, huh? Wait, isn't that kind of similar to the way I think? And that's the thing. Chika Umino writes almost every character in Sangatsu like a legitimate human, with multiple reasons and ideologies behind their every step. Are the bad actions some of these characters do ever justified? No. But by understanding why they're doing things, by understanding the situation they're in and the path that has led them there, we can understand why they would act this way. No bad guys, only humans. And through self-reflection, we could see how even we could end up doing the same things if we were to be put in those situations. It seems pretty logical, right? That people aren't inherently bad or irrational, that we're all a combination of our environment and the personality we were born with, a mix of things that we learned from our parents, school, TV, and random homeless guys and bus benches. But I never even considered this concept. Tossed around by life, blindsided by the impact of my fall and the constant pulsating pain that followed, meant that it was a lot harder for me to realize it was something so logical, something so right. But upon watching March Comes In Like a Lion and seeing these little nuances pop up and seeing how all of these characters had different ideologies and ways of living, yet still helped each other out, boosted each other upwards, I realized the obvious logic behind it. Of course, if we all tried to understand, to stop and think and see where people are coming from, why they think the things they think, or why their opinions seem so radical to us but so rational to them, maybe arguments would simply be polite disagreement, a difference in opinions. But their opinions are so radical and obviously wrong, right? Maybe so. But the thing is that thinking that way, being quick to put labels or categorize people into good or bad purely based on that impression, won't really get you anywhere. Or well, it won't get you anywhere quicker. It's understandable. Trust me, I think it's perfectly understandable to see the world from this point of view, now more than ever. The world goes up in flames in an instant, so many things happen at once, opinions fly left and right, who's lying to me? Who cares about me? Who can I trust really when the people I have trusted are constantly outed as assholes and hypocrites, with the movements I choose to back and the ideologies I trust can seemingly be disproven, debunked, or at the very least shaken up with just a little bit of research or a short Twitter debate. Where exactly have right and wrong gone? Seems like they're both painted black and put in a roulette, spun around when the clock hits 12 and left there by what we wish was a divine entity for us to figure out. Yes, it makes sense to be scared or apathetic when the world seems insane. When the people who get to speak always seem to say the wrong thing or have an agenda that always goes too far. When we see a tragedy filmed with a phone camera in broad daylight and are filled with the same rage and disgust everyone else is surely feeling, right? Of course, people are going to be apathetic, dishonest, abrasive, and cynical. Kids lose the ability to empathize more and more. With information flinging everywhere and opinions taking different, unrecognizable shapes, gazing into the void has never been easier than it is now. The loss of innocence has been accelerated. We're no longer eased into the shitstorm, we're slung into it at 100 miles an hour and forced to feel our skin peel off on impact. With a world in ruin, how can anyone possibly still believe the ultimate humanitarian message of love and peace? That old idealistic stuff. Yes, it's a pretty idealistic message, and one that ultimately, in the grand scope of things, seems to change nothing. But well, that's fine. Because it feels good, and that's enough. Another instance that bashed my brains in while watching March Comes In Like a Lion occurred during the bullying arc. The head teacher of the middle school seeks to have an honest conversation with the instigator of all the bullying, but finds it hard to because the girl is thoroughly jaded and disconnected from her emotions. Yeah, just like me. Her excuse for refusing to regret what she's done is simply that there is no purpose behind being a good person, that society is one of two things, indifferent or cruel. Why should she care? Why should she try to be better when there's misfortune around every corner, when the system in place was set up to wring the life out of her? Like I mentioned earlier, this is something a lot of younger people deal with. With the internet being what it is and our lives taking place there more and more, well, it's only natural that the times we have to develop our ability to empathize has been drastically shortened. Kids get desensitized in almost an instant when tragedy is shown to them through a screen. You have 12-year-old kids out there spewing the old nihilistic talk like, it's always been this way, all humans are trash, those in power have always been evil, etc, etc. Not to mention, having to make friends, the right friends in school to avoid being treated as an outcast often creates that feeling of detachment I was talking about earlier. Her argument seems perfectly sound, but then this hardened veteran teacher steps up to the stage and absolutely shatters this line of thinking with a simple statement, essentially telling her that he's never thought about why he should be a good person, because the thought always came to him naturally, more an instinct than a thought. I want to better myself, I want to see how far I'll go, what places I'll reach, I want to meet the people I'll come to love. Why shouldn't you think this way? He goes on to tell her that the reason she feels this apathetic is because she's scared. Scared of testing her mettle, of finding out just how capable she really is, of failing, of hurting. But if she puts herself out there and gives it a shot, then she'll be able to see just how far she can go on her own, and she would know where to start. Needless to say, this conversation was another major turning point in getting me to change my incredibly cynical and apathetic mindset. But there was still one more issue that was holding me back from truly changing the way I thought. That being that I still felt pretty indifferent because there didn't seem to be anyone who understood me or cared. Sure, I could try being a better person, I was fine with giving that a shot, but what about making connections or empathizing with others? What was the point when I've never in my life felt like someone actually cared for or empathized with me? Putting myself out there emotionally and getting nothing in return seemed dumb. Then I watched the last, maybe second to last, it's the last or second to last episode of the second season. The episode has almost no animation, and it's all narrated from the perspective of Rey's adoptive mom, who we have seen little to nothing of up till that point. She has this really beautiful monologue describing all the hardships Rey faced growing up with them, and it's actually kind of shocking. Because you see, up till that point, Rey's estrangement from his adoptive family, his broken relationship with his adoptive siblings, had always been portrayed as an isolated issue. It was the catalyst for a lot of things, sure, but unlike other issues he faced, there was really nothing to be done about that broken relationship. It was done and over with. The damage was there. Even if Rey could work through other issues in his life with the help of others, this one was done with. The weight was there for him to carry, and he still did even after several years. No one else could understand his agony, right? Yet here was Rei's adoptive mom, a normal housewife as she herself puts it. She knew Rei was a good boy at heart. She understood how difficult it was for him to be his kind self in a household where doing that seemed to worsen things. She knew, but she wasn't able to help. Even though she cared, even though she wished she had the right words, she was unable to help Rei in any meaningful way. She was not equipped to deal with the situation unfolding in front of her, dismantling her family. In a way, it was almost as harrowing to witness as the isolation Rei had to live through. Unable to help him out with such a delicate emotional issue, even she ended up pushing him away, albeit in a more passive way. The episode closes off with her describing a dream she had, in which Rei was her real son and he acted just like her other two kids. And, as she herself puts it,
とがっかりしながら心からほっとしていた。
This episode wrecked me. I sobbed like a baby. I had always felt like Rei and me were kind of similar because we had both had a slice of our childhood snatched away by misfortune, a chance to be someone else, someone more functional, stolen by some unseen, non-existent force we couldn't lash out at. Both emotionally checked out after the few connections we had either failed us or been ineffective in helping us, grieving for the possibilities that could have been in front of us, and feeling absolutely alone in that grief. Yet, here was a completely normal housewife understanding the things Rei had gone through, fully empathizing with him, and succinctly understanding the pain Rei felt, as well as his emotional growth since the last time she'd seen him, all because she loved him, even if she had been unable to properly convey it. See, that's the thing. Humans, we're pretty imperfect in most aspects, so it only makes sense that we wouldn't be able to empathize with others correctly, to care for or show affection for others in the right way. None of us are equipped to be therapists or an emotional anchor for everyone. Sometimes, even if we care, it proves impossible for us to find any meaningful way to help. It's important to remember that, and it's also important to remember that caring can often prove to be enough, that making the attempt is often enough comfort for those going through the pain and those bearing witness to it. The world isn't so idealistic that simply trying will fix everything and everyone, sure, but well, to put it simply, watching Rei's adoptive mom empathize and resonate emotionally with him was really satisfying. Putting yourself out there and trying to make those connections isn't a guaranteed strategy. You might fail, you might die alone, you might get hurt, maybe murdered by that yandere girlfriend you've always wanted. But well, what else is there to do? And yes, I get it. Being a good person is really hard. Being a good person is way, way harder than just being a cynical, uncaring asshole. Trust me, I know. That's how I lived my life for several years. But it's either moving forward or stagnating. And guess which one's worse? So, where does March Comes In Like a Lion mean to me? Well, it means everything to me. I already said that. An anime that changed my life and kept me from losing all hope in humanity and also ended up helping me make some pretty good friends. Well, let's just say I'm gonna be riding this series dick for a life. It's also a testament to how good drama anime can be. Me being a literature snob, well, I don't find drama and anime all that deep. Things need to sell, and solid, thoughtful writing is often traded out for easy tropes and cheap twists. But something like this, I mean, I'll take this over Faulkner and Mishima any day, to be perfectly honest. Okay, then what do I think the core message of the series is? If you had asked me that a year or so ago, I would have simply said that empathy is the word. But actually, I've kind of changed my stance on that. Upon rereading the manga for my third time, I was a bit scared because the moments that had made me break down before weren't resonating with me as much. I'd watched the anime like 5 times and had cried at the same spots all of those times, so I was a bit worried that maybe I didn't care for it as much. But then the Shimada arc came. Shimada is this guy who has given it all up for Shogi and has yet to realize his goal after years of hard work. A lot of us often say, if I give it all up and devote myself to the thing I love, surely I'll see some results. And well, Shimada has given it all up and has still not seen the results he wanted. There's this moment in his arc where he's about to have a big match, and the night before he has this dream in which he gave Shogi up and went back to the country to be a farmer. Into the scene walks a woman holding a little girl, and Shimada tells us that's his girlfriend who broke up with him 5 years ago prior because he had to devote all his energy to Shogi. We transition to a scene in which he's sitting around a table with his whole family and he apologizes for failing them. His grandpa tells him not to worry, that life is what you make of it. Now, this is a horrible dream to have for someone who is already too far into the storm. His body shredded and years devoted to this game, suggesting he could have just lived a normal life and been as happy is one of the cruelest things to contemplate. This was the scene that made me break down this time around. Of course it did. I was now in a similar stage in my life, in which I had to decide between complacency or devotion to the thing I love, at the crossroads, unsure of how committed I am to the thing I call my one true passion. Did this mean I didn't care for the other emotional parts? No, it just meant that I had grown and my worries had changed. And I don't know about you, but to me, an anime where I can go back up to 6 times and appreciate different aspects of it every one of those times, well, it would be dumb of me not to call it my favorite anime ever. March Comes In Like a Lion is about empathy, but also a lot more. This time around, I'm feeling like it's about moving forward more than anything else. Stagnation is your worst enemy. Giving things a shot can hurt, but often the thought that you gave it a shot makes up for that fact. It's a bit of a cliched conclusion, I know, but I for one am definitely curious to see how far I can get, the things I can do and how much I can grow. In a world where we are provided with no true purpose, what else is there to do? 2 steps forward, 1 back, 2 steps back, 1 forward. Don't think about any of that until you're on your deathbed. Enjoy the ride, and make sure you always have people next to you that will enjoy it just as much. Thanks for watching.